the audience for this need of the hour discussion. Today we have Ambassador Mohammad Ashraf Haidari, who is the Afghan envoy to Sri Lanka. Ambassador Haidari was the Director General of Policy and Strategy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan from 2015 to 18. He has also served as the Deputy Assistant National Security Advisor of Afghanistan. He is a Senior International Security Fellow at the New American Century in Washington, D.C., a Research Fellow at the Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies in Kabul, a Visiting Fellow at the ORF New Delhi, and he is also the recipient of many public and academic awards, including the Frederick J. Urbaska Civic Service Award. We are pleased to have him on our panel today. Next, we have on our panel Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, former Indian ambassador to Afghanistan. Ambassador Mukhopadhyay has served in various capacities in Indian embassies and missions in Mexico, Syria, Myanmar, Cuba, France, and the United Nations. He also reopened the Indian embassy in Kabul in 2001 as chargé d'affaires after the ouster of the Taliban in Afghanistan in November 2001. Ambassador Mukhopadhyay is currently affiliated with the Niti Aayog's Niti Forum for the Northeast as an advisor and the chair of a CII task force on economic ties with Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, and is a senior visiting fellow at the Center for Policy Research. A hearty welcome to you, sir. Next, we have on our panel Air Chief Marshal Gagan Bulat Singhala, RWP, RSP, BSP, and USP, who is a former Chief of Air Staff and a former commander of the Sri Lanka Air Force. After his retirement in 2016, he was appointed as the Sri Lankan ambassador to Afghanistan. Air Chief Marshal Gagan is also a fellow of Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, Hawaii, and Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies, USA. He is a graduate of Air Command and Staff College at Air University, US, and an alumnus of the prestigious National Defense College, New Delhi. We are honored to have you on board, sir. We also had Dr. Bahar Jalali on our panel, but unfortunately she is unable to join us due to an emergency. Finally, we have Air Marshal Madheshwaran, the founder president of the Peninsula Foundation, who is the moderator for today's session. The Peninsula Foundation is a public policy research think tank based in Chennai, established to promote innovative thinking and stimulate critical debate on 4 verticals: democracy and governance, international and transnational affairs, science, technology and security, and transformational paradigms. This is our first event of 2022, and we felt it imperative that we start with one of the most pressing issues of last year, the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan and its implication on the rest of the world. We're all looking forward to a lively and interactive session today. So without further ado, I will hand over to the Air Marshal now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhavanti, and Happy New Year to everybody. Ambassador Haidari, welcome and Happy New Year to you. And great pleasure to have you with us today. And Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, it's a great pleasure to have you with us. And Air Chief Marshal Gagan Bulat Singhala, it's a pleasure to have you on board with the Peninsula Foundation today. My apologies to the audience and the panelists that Dr. Bahar Jalali just sent a message in our bag. So due to an emergency, she is not able to join with us. So we will miss her in this discussion today. But those points, in any case, will get. We have other panelists who are eminently qualified to comment on some of those aspects as well. So there are some. Let me lay down the rules as the moderator. I will initiate the discussions, and I will request Ambassador Haidari to start the proceedings. Each of the panelists will initially make the comments on the first questions for about 8 minutes to give an overview and to give their analysis. After which we will continue with the questions, and we will interact with all the panelists to get their views and continue the discussion part. I will request the audience to now mute your mics, and you can go off the video as well, so that we can see the panelists clearly and we can listen to them as well. The proceedings will be recorded. In the last 20 minutes to half an hour, we will open out for the questions and answers and discussions from the audience. And I welcome, you can use the facilities available. You can raise your hand. You can come up on the video and you can raise your questions, and the panelists will be happy to answer that as well. So let me now start the proceedings, and you can put your video off, and the panelists can come online. Let's look 2022 from a South Asian, interests and perspectives with what has happened in Afghanistan since August 15th, all over the last 1 year. As the Americans made a hasty withdrawal, the Taliban swept across the entire country and took over power on August 15th. And since then, of course, a lot of issues have developed. But if you look at Afghanistan from time immemorial, and there's a fine book that has been just published, written by Dr. Bahar Jalali's father, who was colonel and an academician later, and an eminent, research scholar who's come out with Afghanistan's military history from ancient times to modern times. And I believe the reviews, comment on it excellently. Afghanistan is a strategically important, it's a geopolitical diamond in the region. It's a gateway to the West Asia and the Middle East. It's an access point and a gateway to Central Asia. It was also the gateway for people and invaders coming out from the West Asian and Turkey into India as well, and the Indian subcontinent. And therefore, it has been a prized domain from ancient times. It was also a crisscrossing region for trade, whether it's Silk Roads and the trading routes from India into the Gulf and the West Asian regions. And therefore, it has always been a melting pot, and the terrain has been tough. The people have been influenced by the terrain as well, and therefore, it has been a region and a point that's been at the center stage of competition between empires, kingdoms, and of course, in modern times, between great powers. So Afghanistan's influence of great power conquest on Afghanistan is a historical fact. But what is important to analyze is the influence of terrain on the people and the different formations in terms of tribal, traditions and the loyalties have created an ability and made it tough for any power, great power or any other empire, to actually hold on to Afghanistan. That has been the reality. And therefore, it is called as the graveyard of empires as well. But the question that I want to raise now is, with the beginning of the 21st century and 2001 9/11 September event that led to American invasion of Afghanistan, which toppled the Taliban regime, and 20 years later, you actually give it back to Taliban and move away. What has been the result of this entire process? And if you go back into 2 decades earlier, for 4 decades, for 40 years plus, Afghanistan has been embroiled in conflicts and great power contests. And therefore, the question that I actually posed to Ambassador Hydari is Afghanistan a victim more of great power contests, who has used every strategy and tactics in the book of strategies, whether using religion or every other aspect, to actually make Afghanistan a victim of great power contests, and therefore the conflict continues to evolve and continues to sustain. And who are the victims? The people. Today, Afghanistan faces economic crisis, food insecurity. 22 million people are facing starvation, and the warlord, conflict process is looming large, because Taliban may, face immense divisions internally and may actually face a major problem. So the 90s Taliban is quite different from the 2021 Taliban and what Taliban faces today. And here now, as US has moved out and the Western powers have moved out, you're looking at Iran, Russia, and China playing a bigger role. And what are the prospects that you're looking at in this new year? Ambassador Head.
Well, good evening. Thank you so much, sir, for that detailed question. It's great seeing all colleagues and friends. I'm sorry being in a bit late as I've been traveling. Where I am is quite early in the morning. So I thought it was 6:30, but apparently it was 6. Anyways, good to be here with everyone. Again, thanks for organizing this very timely discussion and including some very distinguished panelists, the two colleagues, ambassadors who served in Afghanistan and know Afghanistan quite well. Of course, my counterpart, Ambassador Bulet Singhala, being from Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka having been through decades of war and counter-terrorism and counter-extremism, and the fact that he himself served in that war. It's great to have him here and to draw on his insights to see what lessons can be learned, as we have discussed that in a relevant way for Afghanistan. But exactly your point, as you pointed out and described the geography of Afghanistan, as much as we are right at the heart of Asia with many potentials of connectivity, especially connecting South Asia and Central Asia, and an interest that we have shared with India and was very much worked out in the provisions of the Afghanistan-India Strategic Partnership Agreement, which we signed back in 2011. And one of the hopes was to work with India and hopefully bring our neighbor Pakistan on board to help connect the entire region, South Asia and Central Asia, through Afghanistan, whereby everyone would benefit, but also benefit the people of Afghanistan following, as you pointed out, decades of imposed conflicts. But unfortunately, realpolitik has always taken precedence. Unfortunately, over the past 40 years, Afghanistan has suffered from imposed conflicts. Remember that Afghanistan had a long period of peace. Yes, we were poor, unfortunately less developed, but we were okay internally, despite the diversity of Afghanistan, which is always a peacetime good, but unfortunately always a wartime liability when so many parties from this geography have interfered in Afghanistan, especially our neighbor Pakistan, that has exploited every diversity of Afghanistan to its due strategic advantage. And we know how they have, over the past 40 years, even on behalf of the West, in a very transactional relationship that has continued, deployed what I call ideological ethno-religious nationalism. And there's a lot in that. If you unpack it, they have employed ideology, ethnicity, ethnic nationalism in the Afghan context, and that's what exactly the Taliban now consists of. And that's why also the Taliban sometimes disagree and have differences with Pakistan, as we've seen, in the recent Dora line of skirmishes with the Pakistanis, as the Taliban have tried to take down this cheap fencing that Pakistan has on and off put on along the Doran line. So yes, you're right. We have been a victim of our geography, a victim of many externalities, and a victim of many different types of peace spoilers, which I categorize in 3 groups. Those that are in the total peace spoiling business, such as Pakistan in case of Afghanistan. Those that are in the greedy peace spoiling role, and those that are in the limited peace spoiling role. And this limited, of course, also involves the very international partners and constructive neighbors of Afghanistan, because oftentimes there has been a lack of what I call incentive compatibility when their incentives have diminished, and that includes India, that they have not cared about Afghanistan as much as the people of Afghanistan have expected from them. And that brings me, of course, to the whole what we call withdrawal process, not the peace process, that began in 2019 following the end of the South Asia strategy, which President Trump had announced and implemented for about a year, which had made Afghans so hopeful because it conditioned the success of that strategy on Pakistan's cooperation and a change in Pakistan's behavior to close down the safe havens of the Taliban to give the peace a chance, but that didn't help. And so Trump moved on and brought Zalmay Khalilzad as a kind of peace spoiler, not as a peacemaker. And so he used this very coercive mediation tactics, which I think Ambassador Bulat Singhala from Sri Lanka's context could comment on, because they also tried mediation, going to different countries and holding meetings on and off, but it didn't help. But Sri Lanka, of course, a different context, did the right thing, that they just stuck to their strategy of defeating terrorists. We didn't have that option given the context. And so we moved along with the Ambassador Khalilzad, and then we know that President Biden came, and we were hoping that he would, not betray and abandon democracy and human rights and women's rights and every gain that we have made over the past 20 years with the support of the international community. But again, real politics mattered to him, domestic politics mattered to him, and he had long been convinced that somehow this is not going to work out in favor of their interests. And so he pulled out U.S. forces, NATO forces prematurely, pretty much handing over Afghanistan and our flourishing democracy, despite the challenges and problems and issues of corruption and so on and so forth that we often hear about, to the Taliban. That's what exactly happened, and that's why Afghans, especially the, over 300,000 Afghans who have been educated abroad in countries like India and come back to, staff various institutions, are extremely disappointed. Many of whom have left. Many of them are in the region in different countries trying to leave because they don't see a future under the Taliban. And the Taliban completely being remote controlled by ISI. I remember the ISI chief actually came to Kabul and installed, their favorites, especially the Afghanis, blacklisted by the FBI, and the rest, half of the cabinet of the Taliban sanctioned by the United Nations, which has put the international community in a dilemma what to do. And unfortunately, the sanctions continue, not affecting the Taliban as if they cared, or their state sponsor. In a way, it is given the state sponsor a manufactured humanitarian crisis, completely, gutting Afghanistan of its capacities and any, development achievements that we have had and institutions that we have had, and completely turning Afghanistan into a sort of no man's land, which they can control, and they're doing that pretty well. So as we speak, there is a widening humanitarian crisis, unfortunately, that no one is paying much attention to. The monies raised by the United Nations is not enough. It's pledged, as we know, Afghanistan needs over $600 million every 2 or 3 months. That's to keep Afghanistan on a life support. Just imagine who's willing to pay that, unless Afghanistan actually has an inclusive government acceptable to an absolute majority of the Afghan people, that include youth, women, and other ethnic groups, so that governance is administered properly, and along with that, economy comes back, and we retain the capacities that we have created over the past 20 years. They stay in Afghanistan. Others come back if they're still in the region, so that Afghanistan moves on. The implications are really grave for South Asia. The World Bank often talks about one South Asia, and on and off I've tweeted to say which one South Asia. There is no one South Asia, unfortunately. And from terrorism, extremism, separatism, of course, an issue that concerns China. It's very much on the agenda of SEO, and criminality, drug trafficking. I was just reading that the amount of drugs now trafficked to India has already doubled And the case of Sri Lanka as well. Well, Sri Lanka is both a transit country, increasingly a consuming country, that consuming kilos of drugs that is trafficked to Sri Lanka from Afghanistan. Implication for Central Asia is very clear. ATIM, East Turkestan Islamic Movement, and as well as Islamic movement of Uzbekistan actually supported the Taliban to capture much of northeast of Afghanistan. Right now, they are sheltered across those borders, northeast, northern Afghanistan. The Taliban have also deployed some of their suicide bombers from their battalion, I would even say brigade, that they've created, and they're just waiting opportunities to threaten Central Asia. And that's why Russia has deployed forces there, and the Tajiks are very much on alert. Chinese are very concerned. Of course, they've engaged with the Taliban. They either receive their delegations or they send delegations to Kabul. But more or less, everyone is in a kind of containing the problems in Afghanistan mode, I would say. And I think that's not helpful. It has been tried in the past. We already see the outflow of Afghans into Iran by thousands every day. Unfortunately, Iran, as we speak, is kicking out about 3,000 Afghans or so every day back into Afghanistan. Huge headache for Iran. For Iran, it's also a sectarian issue, as the Taliban are serving as an operational umbrella, not just for ATIM and IMU, which I pointed out, but for a dozen other terrorist networks, including Daesh, which is very inorganic. In case of Afghanistan, the purpose of the creation of Daesh is very much to keep the Taliban in check in case the Taliban misbehaves, and so that then Daesh is there to keep them in check, but also for other tactical, strategic purposes in the region. So opportunities are many. I think for India, clearly there's an opportunity within SCO. It can take a leadership role, working with at least Iran and Russia, but also even with China within the REC framework, Russia, India, China, within even BRICS. And so, yes, there are differences between China and India, but if they sit together and talk and see and assess what's happening in Afghanistan and really look at the implications, India is very much in this geography. India is actually our immediate neighbor as much as China and Central Asia and Iran are. Here, we do look forward to a leadership role from India, again, simply because India's been involved in Afghanistan. Afghans love Indians. We are grateful to all the support that India has provided. I remember that Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, had been spending long hours to, get delegations back and forth and to help the students and to implement projects and to push for the smallest things that, we requested or we expected or we demanded. The ambassador was, there to make it happen. None of that should go in vain. Of course, Sri Lanka has a very relevant experience and very relevant expertise. And we have, over the past 10 years or so, been developing and fast expanding our ties. Just over the past 2 years that I've served, 3 years that I've served in Sri Lanka, we have initial and signed 10 MOUs and agreements covering a wide range of issues. We had the Defense Cooperation MOU almost finalized, and His Excellency the President told me before the collapse of the government that was also being worked out. And so Air Services Agreement actually was just finalized on both sides, and we were hoping to start even a bi-weekly flight. That would have happened had COVID had not happened. And so things were looking good between Sri Lanka and Afghanistan. Potential is there. Relevant lessons can be learned from Sri Lanka. And so with that, I stop here and look forward to additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Hadley. That's a very excellent overview that you've given. In the meantime, I request the audience, you can start putting in your questions and comments on chat so that the panelists can see it as well. Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, I think Ambassador Hydari made a very, very important and salient observation. He actually made a statement that India hasn't done enough earlier. And then, of course, he said the Afghan citizens look forward to the great amount of goodwill, and they look forward to India taking the leadership in dealing with the Afghan issues. And that's, well established, and that's known to all of us. So my point that I raised with you is, you've been there from 2001. You actually restarted the process of establishing the relations. And as the Taliban was removed and the American forces came in, and we worked with the Americans to actually invest immensely in building people-to-people contacts and building the infrastructure and enabling a lot of social capabilities for the Afghan people. What came in 2020 or from 2019, have we been taken aback, or have we been left, let me put a strong word, powerless, to be able to leverage the amount of work that we've done in having a stronger say in what developed in Afghanistan in 2021? And now that Taliban has come back, are we looking to play a role in seeing whether we can legitimize Taliban, but at the same time put enough controls to let them prove themselves? They're not inclusive. Their government is, although everybody has been saying it needs to be inclusive, they're not inclusive. And look at the other aspects of their Sharia interpretations, etc. In the same vein, again, from what Ambassador Hydari observed, I think we have the tools available in terms of working with Russia, China, the SCO, and BRICS, most importantly. I think, can we make a big influence in shaping the future of Afghanistan and impact on the South Asia as well?
Thank you, Air Marshal Matheeshwaran. It's a pleasure to see you again. Congratulations to the Peninsula Foundation for organizing this event. Also a great pleasure, really great pleasure to see Ambassador Ashraf Hydari, who I've been in touch with over the years, as well as Ambassador Gagan Bulat Singhalla, who I met in Afghanistan during one of the Herat security dialogues. Welcome also to the very distinguished participants who are here. I think you've posed some very valid questions, very pointed questions. And so let me get to that right away. Firstly, there is no doubt, to begin with your second question, there's no doubt that, what has happened over the last 6 months in Afghanistan, starting really roughly from May, has been an undoubted setback, not just to India, but in fact, I would say to the entire democratic world. That includes the United States and Europe and all those others who held Afghanistan's hand over the last 20 years. There are 4 ways that I can see that it has impacted on us very directly. One is that it has completely inverted and changed the balance of power in the region, where at one time we had a democratic Islamic Republic of Afghanistan supported by the United States, the most powerful country in the world. Again, also Europe, NATO, and the democratic Asia that included Japan and India, and particularly a historical friend like India. This was the kind of alignment that we had roughly up to, let's say, give or take a few months up to August 2021. And suddenly, overnight, you had a complete inversion of the balance of power. What you had was a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan taken over militarily, not by any, legitimate transition, constitutional transition, supported by Pakistan, reinforced, in fact, by a support of China. And then, of course, countries like Russia and Iran also engaged with the Taliban and ill-disposed towards the United States of America and wanting to see them out. So you had a complete change in the regional balance of power. Second, a country like India, which, as Ambassador Ashraf Hydari pointed out, was a kind of most favored nation, not in a trade sense, but even in a general sentimental and emotional sense in Afghanistan, where we had lost ground over the Soviet intervention and the subsequent period from 1979 to practically 2001, going through the Mujahideen period as well as the Taliban period. We were able to recover lost ground thanks to, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. And as I said, we were in a good position in Afghanistan. We suffered a practically total reverse. Third, in place of the Islamic Republic, we had an outfit that was reared, nurtured, and sheltered and radicalized by Pakistan, which conducted a virtual 20-year hybrid, proxy war, hybrid war in Afghanistan under the very noses of the NATO and the United States and its allies, without them apparently taking cognizance of it, them taking over power militarily in Afghanistan. And lastly, of course, the prospects of radicalization, fundamentalism, and terrorism, spilling over from Afghanistan to the entire region that also Ambassador Haidery spoke about. A very real danger that could affect not just India, but all of South Asia and even beyond, because to the extent that fundamentalist and radical outfits, Islamist outfits in particular, get emboldened by the Taliban victory, they also lend support, and they also lend inspiration once again to the Al-Qaeda, to the Daesh, and similar outfits virtually all over the world. So I think there are various ways in which this has been a setback. I think in the process, I would like to flag a series of miscalculations, if you couldn't call it illusions, but I would even go so far as to say delusions, which led to this situation. I think a lot is said about how much the United States and the West did for Afghanistan, but in actual fact, this is something that is questionable. We don't have the time to go into it here. But the illusions and delusions that I would point out are, first, the entire illusion conducted under the so-called peace process, which was actually a withdrawal process, as Ambassador Haidery again said, was that the Taliban have changed. Well, they may have changed in some ways, but not in the ways that it was claimed that they had changed, which was that they had somehow moderated their ideology. There was no change in ideology. They became more sophisticated in their communications. They became more sophisticated in their diplomacy, but there was no real change in their ideology. Second, that they wanted peace. I think the 3-month military takeover from May to August quite settles that question. They did not want peace. They wanted to take over Afghanistan. Third, that their targets were the foreign forces. In fact, actually, they made deals with the foreign forces in order to target the Afghan people. And the Afghan people, the majority of whom did not have any organic connection with the Taliban, which really came from outside. So the targets were not foreign forces. In fact, they made deals with every other country in the world, including who they called were the foreign occupiers, in order to target Afghans who were obviously moderate in their faith and in their politics. And so that also puts in question the entire sort of illusion that the Taliban were nationalists. They are, and they are showing their nationalism to some extent. But let's not forget that the entire Taliban project, incubated by Pakistan, was intended to erase their Pashtun and nationalist identity in favor of an Islamist identity. Unfortunately, these identities are too deep to completely eliminate. So they still are there. And that is why we are seeing the kind of skirmishes that we are seeing in the Durand Line. Secondly, then counter-terrorism. I think people made the deal. The United States made this deal with the Taliban in the hope that they will contain Al-Qaeda. Russia is engaging with the Taliban in the hope that they'll contain Daesh from spilling over and acting in Central Asia. The Chinese would like to deal with the Taliban in order to contain ETIM. But I think this also is an illusion, because you cannot deal with one fundamentalist outfit without dealing with the entire conglomerate that exists there. Ambassador Haidery mentioned ETIM and IMU, but there are a dozen, some based in Pakistan, some sectarian, some anti-Indian, some anti-Iranian, some anti-Central Asian, some anti-Russian, and so on. So you cannot split them apart, because these are blood brothers who have formed their relationships in the trenches of war and are related by ideological as well as other kinds of kinship. There are still two illusions that are left to be, to be dispelled. One is that the Taliban will actually be able to provide stability. I think this is a very open question. I sincerely doubt it. There are already differences within the Taliban. There will be differences between the Taliban and the ISI and Pakistan. There are differences between, obviously, there is a great difference between a Taliban that has been imposed from outside and the Afghan people. This will take the form of a resistance. It could be a popular resistance. It could be an armed resistance. It may not be visible as yet, but we cannot rule it out in the future. And I would say, given the overwhelming sentiment for freedom in Afghanistan, this is bound to grow over a period of time, particularly as the Taliban become more repressive and there is a reaction to them, as well as to their handling of the humanitarian and economic and other crises that press upon Afghanistan. This could take the shape of a north-south conflict. It could take the shape of a cross-border Pashtun kind of, unionism or nationalism. So there are many ways in which the Taliban will not be able to provide the stability, which the West is hoping. A lot of the West is hoping there. For example, Europe would be hoping that the Taliban will be able to provide the stability. China would be able to hope that they'll be able to provide the stability against terrorism, but also against migration emanating out of Afghanistan. And finally, the last illusion that the Taliban will be able to provide governance. The governance is not in the Taliban DNA. The Taliban is all about imposition of Sharia law in their interpretation. Between 1996 and 2001, and I was witness to this because I was in Kabul within 1 week of the fall of the Taliban, there was absolutely no reconstruction, let alone development. And that was very much the Pakistani project. The Pakistani project was to drive Afghanistan back into the Middle Ages, both ideologically and economically. They did not want the Taliban to actually have relations with other countries. Even the Gulf charities that were active there did not invest in any reconstruction, let alone development. So even if they think of development now under compulsions of governance and necessity and economic and humanitarian crisis, this is not part of their fundamental USP. This will have to be imported. And no guesses for who they expect to import this. I mean, I think Pakistan would like to think that they would be in the driving seat with China behind them to do this. But all these are certain illusions. In the process, I would say that Afghanistan has suffered 3 or 4 very severe betrayals. The first betrayal is the betrayal of Afghan sovereignty against a proxy war, executed from across the border. The second, there's the moderate Islam, which we all advocate, has been betrayed in favor of extremist and radical Islam. And that is not going to be contained within one country, even though the Taliban themselves may not be directly involved. It will be their associated outfits who will. And the third is that it's a betrayal of literally all the values of modern civilization, going back to the French Revolution, the American War of Independence, the 2 world wars, and I would say the entire colonial struggle for independence, including that of India's, which is a basic struggle for freedom. Freedom from fear, freedom from repression, freedom from authoritarian rule, the basic idea that you can elect your own government and be ruled by your own government. Call it democracy, call it whatever human rights, call it political rights, but this is a basic human impulse which has been betrayed here. And I would, while I would not go as far as Ambassador Haidery in saying that India has not cared about Afghanistan, because I think what he's probably referring to is a transient or a passing phenomenon. I think Ambassador Haidery very well knows that India's sentiments and heart are very much with the Afghan people, and whatever may be seen is just an immediate outcome of what happened in Afghanistan. It's a transient thing, I would like to hope. And certainly people have a very strong affinity and feeling for the Afghan people. And of course, that is also the background behind which perhaps no other country has invested as much in hard infrastructure. At the end of 20 years, India can point to a Salma Dam, to a parliament building, to a Zarang Dilaram road, to a Pule Khumri Kabul lines, and 1,000 scholarships per year. Probably no other country, not even the United States, can show that kind of investment. I don't say that there's not more that India could have done. I was there when the partnership agreement was signed. There are many sins of commission. There are some many sins of omission. There are some sins of commission. But on the whole, I think on balance, India has tried to do, and India will continue to do. And there is a lot that India can do and is trying to do even within Afghanistan right now, but with its humanitarian aid, with its COVID vaccinations, with its wheat supplies, and with the medication that it has provided. But there's a lot more it can do offshore and in India, and it can continue, for example, just simply its education program, which we are. And there's a lot more that we can do that certainly Friends of Afghanistan will continue to press in India. So I think, this is the kind of scenario that we see. And then what are we doing right now? Now, given this scenario, it is very easy to hand-wring and to be pessimistic about what India could have done and should not do. And I think primarily this comes down to the question whether we should have engaged with the Taliban before the Islamic Republic fell. Different countries had different reasons to engage with the Taliban. The US engaged with the Taliban because they wanted to get out. Other countries engaged with the Taliban because either they wanted to get out or they wanted the US and the West to get out. Those were not our reasons. And for us, the compulsion was whether we wanted to betray the Republic, betray democratic Afghanistan in favor of an extremist Afghanistan, largely under the control of Pakistan. And I would not say that, India is too strong and important a country and has too many strong equities going back into history and present day to be written off. And India can always, as it did in 2001, India always has the capacity to claw back. And already, we have our, we are building our way back. And one manifestation of that was the Delhi Security Dialogue and the upcoming Republic Day, when all the Central Asian leaders have been invited to attend the Republic Day. This is a way in which we are, in a way, getting back into the Afghan game at the first instance by trying to control the spillover from Afghanistan out, not interfering in the internal affairs, but trying to control the spillover. But it also shows that India has friends in the region. At the Delhi Security Dialogue, other than China, which made an excuse, and Pakistan, which had no interest in coming, every other country came in person. They had the option of coming virtually if they wished, but they came in person. And the joint statement that was released after that was negotiated very easily. I mean, there was a great consensus around that. So India cannot be written off, and India will not forget the Afghan people. And the initial sort of humanitarian assistance that it has made, which we are trying to route through international organizations, is being done precisely with that intent that we do not forget the Afghan people, even as we do not support military takeover by a proxy, a war conducted by an outside power. Of course, the final outcome, and things are evolving. Tomorrow there could be, the last time the Taliban lasted 5 to 6 years, and the rebound was 20 years. And there could be changes tomorrow. The reality of today may not be the reality of tomorrow, and we can all shape that reality as well. So there's a lot more that one could speak, but I think I've already spoken enough, so I'll leave. But in the question and answer, I would be happy to take some question on the geopolitics of the region or any other. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay. That's wonderful. And I think you made a very, very prescient and important observation, is that everybody engaged Taliban from a perspective. The US wanted to get out, and so the European countries. There were other countries who wanted the Western countries to get out, and therefore they were engaged in the Taliban. And India didn't want to deal with Taliban, not at all, given their nature, their characteristics, and their hardcore religious theology. And that's the most important issue. If we continue to engage with Taliban, or we recognize and legitimize Taliban, and like you said, it could, if they become successful in terms of controlling Afghanistan with their, Sharia imposition, and that becomes sort of it'll spill over to other countries. They themselves may not, send people, but it can influence other radicals in other countries, and that becomes a huge security problem. So that is the point I want to take on with Air Chief Marshal Gagan Bulat Singh. You were there at crucial years in 2017 to 2019 when all the developments were taking place. And given the problem that Sri Lanka suddenly saw with that huge Easter bombings, explosions that reflected what's happening there, How do you see the threat, possibilities if Taliban continues to be legitimized in Afghanistan? Correct? You have unmute yourself.
Good evening, Marshal Mateshwaran and other distinguished panelists who are with me on this panel. And I thank the Peninsula Foundation for giving me this opportunity. Well, starting off from my experiences in Afghanistan, I will go on to that later. Let us look at, I would like to echo some things where the two ambassadors emphasized. Right now, we know since 7th of September, Taliban has announced composition of all-male interim caretaker government. From there have a lot of restrictions have been imposed on the Taliban, especially on the factor of aid, where nearly $9.4 billion have been frozen. Now, what has created that? That has created suffering to the Afghan people, and the economy, which was not doing that well, has got further affected. And now insecurity has come in with the pandemic which is going on, corruption and decentralized and mismanagement in the dealings with the government. And further to add to it, the drought was there and now the winter has come in. So right now, there are, they say it's between 22 to 23 million people who are facing the hunger problems. And currently, there is an economic as well as a humanitarian crisis that is being brewed. Now, gentlemen, let us go back and see what we have here. Now, if you take the recent events, when you talk about the Afghan politics with the Taliban, recently you see a certain amount of ministries, there are about 3 ministries, key ministries which was in place, have been dissolved. Namely, the State Ministry for Peace, State Ministry for Parliamentary Affairs, Independent Election Commission, as well as the Independent Election Complaints Commission. So that creates a big doubt on the way of Taliban, where they are going when we focus on democracy and good governance. In addition to that, instead of the Women's Affairs Ministry, they have established a new ministry as propagation of virtue and prevention of vice. So all those things are the new challenges that has been posed to the Afghan people. Right now, we see the government, Afghanistan has a crisis because the core institutions are in disarray and they're suffering from severe brain drain, and also the experienced top-level management has already left or they are trying to leave. So that is going to be an additional burden for, if at all, if the Taliban stabilizes even, they will not have machinery to get it going. And also, we must understand the large displacement crisis, which is a big issue, and also there will be spillover effects to all the neighbors around Afghanistan. But though India is not in the immediate neighborhood, but still for all, there could be effects of that. And also, the government, because of the constraints imposed on the financiers, their coffers are empty. So they're having major issues with regard to running the country. Further, the social services, where the success stories for the past 2 decades, there have been certain liberties that have been enjoyed. But right now, there have been restrictions imposed by the new government, which has come after mid-August. And also, the financial sector, there is a lot of uncertainty in the financial sector, where there are a lot of people who have been investing in that country on the private sector. They are at crossroads. They don't know what they should do right now. So if Taliban decides to continue to impose sudden harsh changes in the urban areas, which had a very different ethos and way of life for the past 20 years, it will further stimulate panic and flight of the people would go into grave situations in addition. And also, we must appreciate the fact that they have imposed certain restrictions on the female working. What does that mean? That would increase the poverty level of Afghanistan. Moreover, haphazard and irresponsible macroeconomic management in the current situation can easily proliferate into hyperinflation and supply storage. If you take during late December, adding on to the restrictions imposed, they have recently put a restriction for the females that they cannot travel more than 72 kilometers unless they are accompanied by a close relative. In addition to that, they have made it compulsory for women wearing the Islamic hijab or the headscarf. And also, they defend their position, saying that it is in line with Sharia or the Islamic law. And also, a decree has been issued that the drivers are male-only transport, and the Afghans need to grow their beards and break away for prayers and refrain from playing music in their vehicles. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can see which way they are moving across. Also, when we talk about these areas, then I feel that the US will reset their engagement with the Pakistan, and they'll review their strategies in order to curtail this situation. However, as quite rightly, I would like to echo the sentiments expressed by both the ambassadors. There is a very kind heart and a big place for the Indian in Afghanistan. I have experienced this personally, and this is nothing that I have read. It's first-hand experience that I'm talking about. Also, another important factor is that how we are going to move forward with the present situation. And also, if you take, there are issues for not only for India, but also for Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and China. So it is a very sensitive situation with regard to present change of events. Pakistan is trying to reshape the management style with regard to in benefit of theirs, as well as China is also not in the forefront, but they are still backing it. So there are few countries who are not coming to the forefront, but still for all, they continue to support the present regime. So it is at this time, I should say that the Sri Lankan position is, as soon as this took place, our Prime Minister, Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa, he reaffirms the Sri Lanka's continued support to the people of Afghanistan following the Taliban takeover. And it was also echoed by our President, His Excellency Gotabaya Rajapaksa. In addition to that, our Prime Minister went further and spoke to former President Hamid Karzai and with the inputs of how things are unfolding and what we could do in support of their cause. And also the former Prime Minister, Ranil Wickremesinghe, had also given his thoughts, and he had said that we can't be a party to terrorism. Everyone fears that Afghanistan would become a center for terrorist groups under the Taliban rule. No one could condone their actions to threaten state and the people. The ideology based on wrong interpretation of the religion is a threat to conventional Islamic states and other nations. And also, there are no justifiable reasons for any legitimate government to recognize Taliban rule, which has walked in through other means, not through the legitimate means. And also, we have two options in our hand for the nations. One is to snap the relationship that we have got, or get into it and progress it to with them. So I feel right now, though the Western, mainly the NATO-backed troops have left the country, still it has become an international playing field where the suffering is to the poor Afghan population. So we need to emphasize on that fact. And I think India, being a major nation in our region, they also could take the lead and make their inroads into the system, how the balancing act could be done in between. Because it is not, because if you take the Panjshir Valley and the former vice president who was there, who was fighting, he is also, his whereabouts are not known. But still for all, through the instruments of power, it is that very important that we engage with Afghanistan to bring back the normalcy into that country. It is very, very important. The effects are, it may not be direct, there will be a lot of indirect effects. And though we are not in the immediate neighborhood, still for all, we could have also effects of that. And ladies and gentlemen, I wish to draw your attention that in 2001, when Taliban was in power, that they blew up and destroyed the Bamiyan statues, which is in Bamiyan. Actually, those are UNESCO has declared as a World Heritage Site. Still, there are different platforms. They are trying to see, taking apart the religious side, going into the cultural side, how we could rebuild these things. So it is not a treasure for only Afghanistan, it is a world treasure which has been destroyed. So also, when you take the chronology of events, the Kabul community, however, it is very hard to believe that they would recognize the present regime, unless it could be an inclusive government which is appointed. But so far, after 5 months of governance, we have not yet seen that aspect. So it is a very important thing, and I think the world at large, we should come into the rescue and restore what is needed for the future generation of Afghanistan. Very unfortunately, the younger generation, they are at crossroads. I sometimes communicate with them, whom I have acquaintances with. They say, we don't have any hope. We don't know where we should go or we could go. So that is their position of the masses in Afghanistan. And talking of the pandemic right now, still they believe that with Taliban coming in, the pandemic has also gone away. But very unfortunately, there is approximately 40 million people, and there is only 800,000 who has been tested for COVID. I'm sure if there is more testing, there will be more. So that is also a point that we need to consider, because it is important to emphasize that need, because it is going to be a problem, because we don't know what is the detection that is taking place. On that note, I would like to open for discussion and share my experiences with the forum here on certain points that you have come across, and I should share my thoughts. And I would like to echo at this point Ambassador Hydri's position with regard to what is happening now, and of course Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, because I know the contributions that the Indian government has done in that country. I have known during the 3 years I was there, I have been closely monitoring what has been happening. So I think India has done quite a bit, but maybe in the context of it is not enough, it could be the position. So with that, I would conclude, and I'm open for discussion for whatever the points that the forum would like to have. Thank you, Air Marshal Mateswaran.
Thank you, Air Chief Marshal. It's excellent, analysis from your perspective. Let me just raise one question before I open out to the audience, and that's to all three of you. And I start with Ambassador Hydri. The problem, obviously, is Pakistan and its support. First question is, couldn't Taliban have been stamped out completely post 2001 if US had recognized, and they knew Pakistan, the external sanctuary for any terrorist outfit or insurgent group is extremely important. And if the external sanctuary is not eliminated, you will not kill it. And therefore, on the one hand, there were supporters of Pakistan regime and looked the other way while Pakistan continued to actually, support Taliban. It had its own problems as well, and therefore that country itself was somewhat divided. But this has not been addressed effectively. And for the future, if you really want to deal with Taliban, and that since Taliban, the core aspects of Taliban is radical Islam and Sharia practice. If that is going to be allowed to continue, then you're legitimizing the past Taliban again in the present. I believe the present Taliban has, its core leadership is based on the original Taliban. But they also they have no experience and expertise in administration and governance and foreign policy. Therefore, they've actually imbibed some of the educated people in the current times. If you read the writings of, Selig Harrison about the, 70s and early 80s, which led to the Soviet invasion and what happened at that point of time, and then about a writing by a former Taliban, Abdul Salam Zaid, one gets a clear picture as to how the divided Afghan society and the warfighting warlords, conflicts have given room to Taliban to take center stage. And that root needs to be eliminated, because that any state on theological foundations alone needs to continue to propagate a strong, religious ideology, which is radical to control people. And that's a danger for the entire region. So how do you think this could actually be resolved, given that new players are going to be big players, China, Russia, Iran, with lesser, room for maneuver for the US, and how will India be able to deal with this part?
Well, thank you so much. Again, I think as all the panelists and yourself pointed out, and I say this simply because of my own experience under the Taliban when I was in Afghanistan in the 1990s, and the Taliban that we see today, as they just recently even ordered the mannequins in the stores to be executed. So there is absolutely no change, and they're even taking attendance in certain mosques in Afghanistan, where if someone is missing from the mosque is not reported, then they could be punished, or stopping young men and simply cutting their hair or beard and humiliating them. So there is really no life in Afghanistan as we speak under the Taliban. Forget about governance and rule of law. I mean, since they came in last August, everything is completely come to a standstill. People talk about, the coming catastrophe of economic collapse. The economy is already collapsed. There is no economy. If you cannot withdraw even $200 or $300 that you may or may not have in a bank to support your starving family, then there is no economy. Even before this, unfortunately, Afghanistan had been suffering the adverse effects of climate change and, of course, conflict and poverty and COVID. And probably more than 50% of the Afghan population was unemployed. Very few people had employment. That's why we had, such a swell in government and people trying to use any connections, any contacts, any practices to get a job simply to make a living to support a family. That's why corruption was so widespread. And so all of that is gone under the Taliban, simply because the international community, which used to support some 70% of the Afghan budget, has discontinued providing those resources. The international forces are gone, which used to be a source of revenue in terms of purchasing locally or spending locally and so forth. So you have over 100,000 plus militants, terrorists, extremists, whatever you call them, that killed and destroyed for the past 20 plus years. And there's nothing else that they can do. And I certainly, in a funny way, I tweeted to say that, you know, the Taliban destroyed everything up to August, and the only thing that is, you know, remained there just, you know, a few kilometers of cheap fencing put up by, you know, the Pakistanis to serve no purpose, and they're just, you know, getting their hands on that to destroy that, and they're doing that, and we don't really need it. And so there's such a challenge for the region that the region cannot simply contain it and just you know, overlook it and somehow hope that the spillover effects within transcend the borders or the Doran line, even affecting Pakistan itself. That's why they're also worried, and that's why they've been, you know, appealing on behalf of the Taliban. On the one hand, trying to manage this chaos and this manufactured crisis. On the other hand, to milk the international community for resources to prop up what their creation and to implement what I call the Taliban Project. So the region, as a result, has this challenge, which is an opportunity to simply act. If you look at the agenda of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for years, they get together every 2 or 3 times at the, you know, heads of government, heads of the state, foreign minister, even, you know, technical. And the agenda is to counter terrorism, extremism, separatism, criminality, or drugs production and trafficking, all of which now have converged under the Taliban in Afghanistan, and all of which are actually, you know, spreading across our borders into Central Asia, of course, China, South Asia, and the rest. And now NATO is gone because for a long time, the countries such as Iran, Russia, China used to complain about the presence of NATO and how NATO's presence in Afghanistan was destabilizing not just Afghanistan, but the entire region and, you know, hurting their interests. Now, there is an opportunity for, you know, the SCO. NATO is gone, SCO should be in. Why it shouldn't be? And they have every influence and leverage individually and collectively over Pakistan. And foremost, China. I mean, China really needs to look at, you know, whether an Afghanistan that is peaceful, stable, right at the heart of this, you know, region, integral and essential for connectivity, or an Afghanistan that is filled with these thugs, medieval militants and terrorists that actually really conform to nothing. I mean, SCO recently met 40 plus countries, and none of them practice what the Taliban, you know, are trying to implement and enforce on the people of Afghanistan. Simply, in none of the Muslim countries around the world. So they're completely un-Islamic. They're defacing Islam. They've given Islam the worst, you know, image. Anyone now as a Muslim going, you know, through these airports, they'll look at your name 10 times simply because it's a Muslim name. Who do you associate that name with? Of course, the likes of the Taliban, that's what people watch. People don't have the time to, you know, study and research and think who the Taliban or how, you know, vast the Muslim world is and so on and so forth. And so the OIC itself must think and look at the Taliban as a liability. Look at, you know, Saudi Arabia's opening. Emiratis are now a model in the region. Qataris are, you know, dealing with everyone and pushing into all directions. But look at what the Taliban are doing in Afghanistan. And who they're doing it to. A people which, you know, have suffered for the past 40 years, and a people that they've been killing just 10,000 plus a year reported by UNAMA until, you know, August. And now they're starving by hundreds of thousands. So you see that this is nothing being Afghan, nothing representing Afghan, nothing representing our culture, our society, our past, our future, nothing, absolutely nothing, or any civilization. It's just a project created for this purpose. How long it would, go, like my colleague pointed out, 5 years or 6 years. Foremost, Afghan people are already fed up. We see women on the streets every day, as Ambassador Bulasangala pointed out. When you just simply ban half of any country's population from work and education, you immediately have a humanitarian crisis on your hands. It happens in India if India does it, or in Sri Lanka, or even Pakistan itself. Simply, a society with half of its, over half in our case, simply because so many men have been killed over the past 4 years. We have more women in Afghanistan than men. And more women are educated, especially the past 20 years, than men. And now they've just banned women from working and schoolgirls, from going to school. So that itself ensures, guarantees endemic poverty. The adverse effects of climate change. Afghanistan has hit the hardest in South Asia. I served as Director General of the Cooperative Environment Program, SACEP, much like SARC is 8th member. South Asia itself is the most vulnerable region to climate change. And within South Asia, Afghanistan is the most vulnerable because we have actually no coping mechanism. So at the same time, hit by what is ongoing conflict, climate change, COVID, poverty, displacement, and on top of that, the Taliban are doing all these things to the Afghan people. And so the neighborhood of Afghanistan, like I said, we have established mechanisms. Those established mechanisms have established agendas, especially under SCO. They have influence, they have leverage. As a result, they must act. They should not try to somehow contain, put more forces along the border and keep the Afghan people boiling under the Taliban, because this is going to spill over, not just in the immediate region, we know that, but also it will hit Europe, it will hit America sooner or later. We know US policies under every 4 administrations come and go. Their generals have come out, their former ambassadors have written many op-eds, including one in the last few days before Kabul failed, that there is still an opportunity to make a course correction, and they called on President Biden to not allow Afghanistan to be taken over illegally, forcefully by Pakistan and its project, but he let it happen. He let it happen, and he's taking responsibility for it. No one is happy as far as I know, indeed, among Democrats or Republicans who have spent time in Afghanistan, who have served in Afghanistan, who think long-term on policy, on the strategy. This is purely, political between the two presidents, Biden and Trump. So it's a loss for the region. Unfortunately, it's definitely a major loss for democracies. And unfortunately, that a coalition of democracies with overwhelming power and resources just let down what was a flourishing. Yes, I know problems with the government, but if you look at the transformational gains in human rights, women's rights, and global goals, we all have embraced this 2030 global goals. Now, one country that has unfortunately completely fallen off that agenda, it is Afghanistan. The one country out of 190 plus countries where women are banned and girls are not going to school, that's Afghanistan. So this is implications not just for the region, but for the rest of the world. And equally, there are opportunities to act. Ambassador Bulat Singhala pointed that out. Ambassador Mukhopadhyay pointed it out. So the Afghan people simply call on our neighborhood, foremost on India as a democracy, as a deep friend of Afghanistan, to not just continue providing humanitarian assistance, which is just recently done. We appreciate that. We also call out Pakistan on not allowing the overland transportation of humanitarian aid from India to reach the people of Afghanistan that they're starving.
Thank
So
you.
we will not forget that. We will not forget that. The Afghan people will not forget that. Our books will not forget that. Our kids will not forget that. Pakistan is lost in Afghanistan. Pakistan will always lose in Afghanistan by what it has done to the people of Afghanistan.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yeah, thank you. And in that context, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, you think India could leverage SCO, given that it's dominated by China, and bring pressure on Pakistan in the context of Taliban? Very strong words that Ambassador Haidery actually.
Yeah. Thank you, Marshal Matheeswaran. Let me say that I share the views expressed by, Ambassador Haidery, as well as Ambassador and Air Chief Marshal Bulat Singhalla on almost everything. I don't entirely share the optimism regarding the SCO. But I think that's, actually a little beside the point, because the SCO really is for primary part pretty much a vehicle of China in the region. And China has not really shown itself as acting in the larger interest, but only on its own selfish interests. So I would not put so much store by the SCO in, even though I agree with him that the principles of the SCO and what's happening in Afghanistan are in total contradiction, and they should take note. But let me actually just answer your first, your first set of questions. One is about Pakistan, and the second is about how it's possible to contain the kind of radical values that the Taliban have unleashed once again in the region. So, to the first question, Pakistan, it's really baffling, because actually successive American presidents have realized that Pakistan is the source of the problem. That was the reason why President Bush sent Richard Armitage to President Musharraf with the message that if you don't cooperate on, the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan, I think he used terms like you'll be bombed back into the Stone Ages. That was also the reason why President Obama, during the campaign trail, he described the war in Iraq as a war of choice and the war in Afghanistan as a war of necessity. And within Afghanistan, he said the theater of the war was in Afghanistan, but the locus, the source, the origin of the war was in Pakistan. And that was the rationale for his creation of the mandate, or the AFPAC mandate of Richard Holbrooke. He too failed to follow up with that, with that insight. And then that was also the logic of the South Asia strategy of President Trump in August 2017, which is that Pakistan is the source of the problem. And in fact, India could be a contributor to its solution. But it is really mystifying in some ways, but I'll try to explain why, that having had the epiphany, having realized this, and this was also echoed by several generals of the United States and even on the NATO, having made that diagnosis, they failed to follow up with any kind of coercive diplomacy. In fact, more carrots and more carrots were thrown at Pakistan rather than sticks at all. And I think that opportunity has now gone, because now Pakistan has the full backing. I think the US-China polarity has grown, and in that polarity, Pakistan has the full backing of China. So it is not going to be that easy to discipline or punish or to lock Pakistan into into a kind of coercive diplomatic track, as it may have been possible a little while earlier. And the reasons are, I think, twofold. For one is the United States never took a strategic look at appreciated the strategic value of Afghanistan, which everybody else does, ever since they drove the Soviets out of Afghanistan. And in fact, strategically, they probably always thought that Pakistan matters more, whether it's in the context of China or the Islamic world or its nuclear weapons or terrorism. And so therefore, the West has treated Pakistan with almost kids' gloves. And I think that has been the problem. The second, about whether this can be contained. I didn't mention in my CV that I first traveled in Afghanistan as a student in 1977. And I totally endorse what Ambassador Haidery just said, that the Afghans are not radical Islamists, that they are like any other moderate Islamic society. They stand for pretty much those values. And this applies even to the Pashtuns. There are conservative and very conservative, and you might even say ultra-conservative elements, but that's very far from a kind of radical, militant, jihadist, extremist kind of outfits that have been created in the Taliban. And I can't say that I know how exactly this can be contained. But one thing is sure, that this is an alien ideology, and that I will expect that the basic instincts and the basic reflexes of the Afghan people will reassert themselves, and that politically they will be able to combat this alien ideology and this alien force, even though there are reasons for that alien, kind of ideology. And the second I would say is that there is a fundamental contradiction. And again, we come back to that whole complex of SCO, RIC, and and BRICS that you referred to, which is that there's a fundamental contradiction between the Chinese agenda and the Pakistani agenda, and that one may hope that at some stage it will come out into the open. The Pakistani agenda has been to constantly destabilize Afghanistan so that Afghanistan can't stand on its own feet, that Afghanistan cannot be strong enough and become a problem for Pakistan via the Durand line or any other way. So it's been constantly to destabilize and keep Afghanistan unstable and destabilized, so that and it has used radicalism for that purpose. But for China, that's not the agenda. If China wants to pursue its BRI, its strategic outreach, its economic interests in Afghanistan, its mineral resources, it seeks stability. So at some stage, this contradiction, one expects, will surface. And maybe then it might be possible to forge some kind of regional cooperation of the sort that Ambassador Haidery spoke about. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And let me open out to the audience. If anybody wants to raise questions, you can raise your hand. You have the facility available here, or you can just come up straight away and then ask questions. Anyone? General Kapoor, would you like to comment or raise the question? Is he there? Okay, anybody else in the audience? Any questions? Okay, just in the context of what Ambassador Mukhopadhyay mentioned about China's interests, and Chief Marshal Gagan, China has invested heavily in Sri Lanka as well, and therefore, and having been in Kabul as well, you must be aware of the CPEC implications and China's investment there. China's objectives and focus in the larger game of BRI as well as economic investments. So how do you see China playing out with its known interest in Afghanistan in terms of its economic and trade and investment interests? Now, how do you think it's going to balance Taliban and its own interests in that process? And having seen the Chinese investment in Sri Lanka very closely.
Actually, China, they have how they look at it is they want to have their footprint and reach within Asia and Great Asia going up to the African area as well. If you take the Sri Lankan context, China has been investing for some time, as well as now it is shared. If you see the developments, recent developments, India is also taking a stake in Sri Lanka's development. So it is, I would say it's a balance, because what Sri Lanka needs is, we need infusion. We need FDIs to come into the country. So we are looking at that for our future growth and development. Of course, it could be interpreted and it could be said that they have other interest in coming to Sri Lanka. Yes, it could be, because there are no free lunches anywhere in the world. So it is, Sri Lanka looks at it, and because their engagement with countries is more on the economic footprint, more than the military footprint. So though there is the airport which has been developed under Chinese and also the Hambantota port, still we keep control of them. So also there's the development China port city which has been developed. So we have put certain control measures and safety nets so that we will maintain our control over those assets. So having said that, but we will continue to further go into areas now. Actually, there is certain amount of development in the east where the Indian Oil Corporation has come into, which is, there is a tank farm which happened very recently. So it is, things are happening on both sides, as well as in China, as well as with India as the major stakeholders on interest in Sri Lanka, I would say.
Thank you, Gagan. And Admiral Sinha has raised his hand. Shekhar sir, go ahead, ask your question.
Thank you very much, Matsi, and great to see my friends, Ambassador Hydari and Gautam Mukhopadhyay. Well, I'm only a student of Afghanistan, really, of Afghanistan watcher. Yes, I have been there a few times, and I have very great friends with many people in Afghanistan. I have actually quite agree with what Gautam mentioned. That the polarization of China and US, as far as Pakistan is concerned, to support Pakistan in this, not openly, but certainly very quietly, and therefore we shouldn't expect very much from these two in the near future. The 2 points I wish to make is that India has just sent some vaccines for co-vaccines to Afghanistan. The humanitarian aid, India's biggest asset there is, of course, the Salma Dam and Parliament, etc. Fine, but the human capital is great. I think it's the people of Afghanistan who like the Indians, and therefore possibly the expectation was a lot more as far as the settling of Afghans in India was concerned, giving them visa was concerned. So it's not that we don't have our internal issues. We have internal problems, and if Ambassador Hydari had to say so many things, and I think Gautam has rightly accepted that yes, we could do more, and that will happen. It will take its own time because there are many other issues involved here internally. But the 2 points that I want to say is that first of all, let's supply the things which are required to get over the human suffering. And we should keep the lines of communication open, which is open, I believe now. If there is some kind of control center there from where the distribution of the aids can be done, and it should reach the right people in the right areas, then we will do a lot. And it's a really pity that we had supported the girls' schools and women's colleges, etc., etc. We built and we inaugurated, and very happy scene. But I think all that is now behind. The second point that I want to make is how much is the people's resistance forces doing from the areas in the north, the Northern Alliance. Is it likely to gain momentum? Are the neighboring countries in the north, are they supportive? What happens with that? Maybe Ambassador Hydari can mention about that. The second point is about this Durand line. There is fair amount of activity right now around the Durand line, and the claims and counter claims that it is manufactured by Pakistan, and second one is that no, it is actually happening in the Taliban statement that we don't recognize this Durand line. Is there something happening there? I mean, this is just from my own knowledge, really. Maybe any of the speakers, any of the ambassadors could mention that. Thank you, and thank you very much for a very enlightening and a very good sort of expose to what is happening in Afghanistan and what is the background. Thank you.
Okay, so this will be the concluding remarks, and let me also add with Ambassador Mukhopadhyay's invite them to comment on that. In the context of Panjshir Valley, that Admiral Sinha raised the issue. How will the threat work out for Tajikistan from Taliban? One, and India played a role in supporting the Northern Alliance and those developments earlier in 2001. And now, given our linkages there, how will that play out strategically for India to be able to influence or control any development in Afghanistan? Who wants to start? Ambassador Hydari or Ambassador Mukhopadhyay?
I think since Admiral Sinha had a specific question for Ambassador Hydari, maybe he could start and then I can.
Yeah, 3 points. Thank you so much, Admiral. It's great seeing you and for your continued support and Friendship, right. I think the humanitarian assistance, as you pointed out, I think should continue from India, making sure that it reaches the targeted beneficiaries. Unfortunately, what I hear that people don't get much, even from the assistance has actually gone to Afghanistan. And I also hear that the Taliban tried to channel that assistance to areas of their interest. Not that, of course, those areas people don't need assistance. Right now, as we speak, over 22 million people, and I would say all Afghans need support. It's not just about, these millions of statistics of different nature that UNOCHA, UNICEF, or WFP for their own reasons and purposes put out. But actually, everyone needs support in Afghanistan. I would say that over half of them acutely need assistance. So we should make sure that that's prioritized and that assistance reaches the targeted beneficiaries, and I would say equitably across Afghanistan. And India can do that in its best position because it has a lot of friends on the ground. Anyone would talk to India and he would tell the truth to India, especially these days that Afghans are under so much pressure and stress. I think that one country can get the right aid to the right people as India, simply because of your contacts on the ground. On the resistance, there's certainly now growing appetite as people more and more see what the Taliban really stand for, as the Taliban have failed so far to establish an inclusive, broad-based representative government. An absolute majority of the Afghan people have demanded that, regardless of ethnicity. And of course, one of the concessions that we made, of course, under Doris and coercion, was to release, remember, some almost 6,000 terrorists and drug traffickers. And the reason I think why the government was able to make that concession was also in part because of the support from the people of Afghanistan to make peace and return for the establishment of an inclusive government on which the Taliban completely reneged. They got the, released the concession, which, then joined their ranks and fought alongside the rest of the Taliban to destroy and capture Afghanistan. So that did not happen. So the people are absolutely dissatisfied, unhappy, and not welcoming the Taliban. But the resistance, as we all know, given Afghanistan's experience with resistance, needs sponsors. Resistance needs resources, sustainable resources. There's no shortage of willingness on the part of the Afghan people to fight back radicalism, extremism, and terrorism. They did that on behalf of this region and the world. But the world and the region, our neighbors and our friends, should now provide those resources. If they don't, then Afghans cannot, fight empty-handed. Now, a militant force that is now inherited some $80 billion worth of American equipment. To the extent that last night we saw this clip, you may have also seen that the Taliban is playing with a helicopter like a toy and until it crashes. And then behind the Taliban, we know this rogue state that endlessly supports and finances that. So think Afghan resistance with no support from no one versus the Taliban and the inheritance of billions of dollars worth of equipment, plus a rogue state willing to support endlessly. So that's open. On the fencing, I think the Afghan people really don't care. I wish they didn't destroy it, but it doesn't serve any purpose. So, and it's very cheap fencing. It's nothing that, it wouldn't fall apart on itself. It's not much here and there. So it could very well be propaganda to somehow, ignite the sense of nationalism in the Afghan people, in favor and in support of the Taliban, that see the Taliban are actually, defending the Doran line or oppose, any incursions or aggression from the Pakistani side. Or there was even, some propaganda on how they're also at the skirmish with the border guards of Turkmenistan, which the embassy of Turkmenistan rejected. That has not happened. So there is a lot of propaganda going in favor of the Taliban, much like in the months before the illegal and forceful takeover of Kabul. So that machinery is still there, and it's used for these purposes. So we don't care about the fencing. The Doran line is disputed. It will never be resolved until Afghanistan is an inclusive government. The parliament is back, democracy is back, and having people, debate that and then make a decision. So anything that Pakistan does, either way, is useless. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I think two questions on humanitarian aid. On humanitarian aid, I would say that, look, we have to do with what we have. We don't have a perfect situation. There is a dilemma. You want to reach aid to the people who really need it. But the only two mechanisms that you have are either through the Taliban or through the international organizations. And we have chosen that route. Even though we know that that may not be perfect, that the Taliban on the ground can hijack a part of the process, but at least we can hope that a good part of it reaches the target audience. And this is what we had actually done in 2002 as well with the 1 million tons of wheat. When Pakistan refused to let it go overland through Pakistan, we converted it into, with the help of the WFP, World Food Program, converted it into high protein biscuits and then shipped it directly into Afghanistan. And it was the WFP machinery then was able to distribute it as part of the school children's food program. And it was a very valued kind of assistance. So I think we are trying to do the best under bad circumstances. At least the messages are there. And if we see that the Taliban actually implement it in the spirit that it's intended, I'm sure India would not refuse to provide more. On the question of, the kind of resistance, I think I would agree with Ambassador Haidery. But I would also say that, look, events like this are cataclysmic and they take a long time to unfold. Imagine when the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan, it took, that was, when was it, 1989?
1991.
Yeah, 89. And I think it took 2 years for the Soviet Union to collapse. It took another 3 years, 1992, sorry, another year for Najibullah's government to collapse. It took 4 years then for the intra-Mujahideen fighting to finally give way to 5 to 6 years of the Taliban. So, one shouldn't expect that even the resistance right now is in a state of shock. The leadership is dispersed all over the world. As somebody said, people don't know where some of the leadership is. So it will take time for the resistance to develop. And I think what the ways in which the international community, even just from a humanitarian point of view, can help is to provide the kind of fora that is required for Afghan people in the diaspora who are dispersed to be able to get together and discuss at least their future, quite apart from the education, the health, the room for media, the room for civil society, and other things that the international community could continue to do to at least keep alive the voice of the youth and women and democracy. So I would say that the only thing I would say is when Ambassador Haidery talks about sponsorship, I think there has to be a balance between an internal political process and an external support. I don't think it's possible to provide the sponsorship without an internal process. But, there's obviously a dynamic between the two. And I do agree with him that this has been, and I did say so, that democracy has been betrayed. And every betrayal of democracy actually cedes ground to those who advocate different forms of autocracy or authoritarianism, whether it is fundamentalism or militarism or one-party dictatorship. And therefore, even the West, which has been a champion of democracy, should take a strategic view of this withdrawal, because in effect, of this betrayal, because in effect, by this betrayal, it is ceding ground to its strategic adversaries.
Thank you, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay. There's one last question, I think I'll just give that person. Soumya Avasti, please call out your question.
Thank you so much. My name is Soumya. I'm from Vivekanand International Foundation. I have a question to Ambassador Haidery and also to Gautam Mukhopadhyay. So 2 days back, I was listening to this interview by Yusuf Zai in Pakistan, and he said that India doesn't have any option but to go via Pakistan whenever they want to send relief aid for Afghanistan. And of course, he continues to malign the India's intentions in Afghanistan. But my question is more about the dependency that we have on Pakistan, or do we have it really, or it's just the propaganda that is being circulated? What is the reality of it, and how will you react to something of this sort? Thank you.
Shall I go first? Ambassador Haidery?
Go ahead.
Of course, yes, please.
Right.
Please.
So look, as I said before, it's not like we don't have options. It's not like we don't have equities. It's not like we don't have friends. And it's not like Afghanistan doesn't have other neighbors. As you know, we have also invested in the Chabahar route. Iran is a possibility. The Central Asian republics are a possibility. Diplomatically, on the security track, we have, clearly already established our kind of our relationships with them. The Central Asian leaders are expected here. Even during the evacuation, some of the evacuation was routed through those routes. The options are there. The overland route is the shortest, easiest. Pakistan can either facilitate it and show some sympathy for the Afghan people, or it can obstruct it and show its true colors. And if Mr. Yusuf Zai or whoever it is chooses to choose the obstructive route, as Ambassador Haidery said, the Afghan people will draw their conclusions. So I would not say that we don't have options. We have the options, and they can be used anytime.
Yes, I completely agree with what the ambassador just said, and I think India does have very good options. Central Asia, definitely Iran, Charbahar, I think can be utilized now, and Iran and India a very good relationship, and I think Iran would definitely want to support any humanitarian aid to be transported through Charbahar and to Afghanistan, especially providing aid to the populations in western, especially northwest of Afghanistan, where people are extremely poor. So there are definitely options there. Pakistan can choose, like I said, to do what is humanitarian, I think, free from politics, or just be what it is. And of course, we will not forget. Thank you.
Sorry, I might also add that, we invested in the Zaranj-Delaram route precisely with this kind of contingency in mind.
Thank you, Ambassador. We've actually come to the end of our, already exceeded our time, but I'm just, if the panelists are okay, there are two questions. Is that okay? Will we take the
Sure. Yeah.
Jaya Bhattacharya and Prateek Kapil. Shout quickly and you can shoot your questions. Jaya first.
Hello. I would like to bring quickly the point that apart from helping Afghanistan in other ways, what we really need to do, I feel, is to stop the demonizing of Afghan people who are perhaps there at the moment and have also dispersed to the rest of the world, by creating an awareness. And I don't know how it can be done, but we might have to think about that, because that's also a very pertinent thing to do, because at the moment it is perceived that Afghan people have got this Taliban rule because they wanted it. And secondly, because it's 20 years, which is a long time, and American money was basically lost there. How long can they go on supporting them? My point is that the 20 years that has taken has actually created a whole new modernization because of the will of the Afghan people. And as Afghan people go to the rest of the world as refugees or stay there, unless we create an awareness that the Afghan people wanted that modernization, we cannot create a fair system for them when they come to the rest of the world, or if we try to create this awareness that something needs to be done there to help them. So I would like to know that, is there any awareness campaign that is going on to basically make the cause for their people and to make the world understand that they have actually tried as citizens to for a change, and they do not represent, Afghan people do not represent Talibans? That's my question.
Can we also take the last one? Pratik?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Peninsula, for a very insightful discussion. My question is to Ambassador Mukhopadhyay. So there was a discussion about there were disagreements between EU and US on the withdrawal, and also the EU envoy for Afghanistan had said that India and EU are coordinating. So what are the realistic prospects for strategic convergence you see between India and EU? Thank you so much.
Okay. Go ahead.
Ashraf, would you like to go first this time? Yeah.
I think, thank you. I think that was a very good comment. Afghans do get demonized, with the exception of those a few thousands who got on some planes and made it to Europe and to the US. Unfortunately, I dealt with that family situation, and believe me, it was not easy to get 3 people out to, North America. Anyone who thinks that, Afghans are so welcome to emigrate, and all these big numbers that you hear from Canada or Australia and US, believe me, it's not easy to make it to those countries. So many thousands of Afghans, unfortunately, are anguishing in Iran and Turkey, unfortunately, waiting to see if they could make it. Even in Sri Lanka, there are some young Afghans who made it from Doha, and have been contacting those embassies, and those embassies have been telling them that, there's such a backlog back in Washington, and they've been waiting to get a visa to make it. And so the world, unfortunately, has not been that welcoming to those Afghans who have tried to get out and make it. And especially, I should say again, US could do a lot more, and definitely India could have done a lot more, and evacuating Afghans and helping now evacuate those thousands of students with the scholarships stranded in Afghanistan, and helping provide a pathway for Afghans who've spent decades in India to acquire citizenship, naturalization, much like Indians do, and the West, as they go there for different reasons. After 3 to 5 years, they naturalize. Afghans should be able to naturalize in India, because they would, of course, not only India is a natural home for them. India is one place where Afghans have always felt respected and secure, and not troubled by the law enforcement or anyone, always welcome. But there's no reason why they shouldn't be allowed to naturalize. But many of them are unfortunately in the limbo. So there is no campaign except Afghans like me as a diplomat, or just oftentimes I even take that cap off and just speak as a normal citizen, as I've been doing today, to fight back these misperceptions about Afghans. Afghans simply want a normal life on our own soil. Afghans are simply forced to flee. They would never leave, Afghanistan if they didn't have a reason and fear of well-established, well-founded fear of persecution, as defined in the 1953 Geneva Convention definition of refugee. Most Afghans in Afghanistan simply don't have the means, as we recall from the 90s, any Afghan with any means who could leave Afghanistan at least got either to Iran or Pakistan. Simply, they reject the Taliban. They reject the Taliban's mentality, ideology, and just their, medieval treatment of people. So people in the world should know that Afghans are simply like them. They've always welcomed to modernize and develop on a sustainable basis. And poverty, we are a youthful population, 70+% of our population under the age of 25, very much globalizing, very much want to progress and prosper and live in safety and security at home if possible. If not, then they have to flee until that's possible. And for that, we need everyone's understanding and support. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. I think that was a very pertinent question. And as far as I'm aware, there are no such awareness programs. But the reason that I actually referred to my short sort of travels in Afghanistan in 1977 was precisely to illustrate that, basically the Afghan people are not extremists. They are not radical. They are like people elsewhere, all people all over the world who want basic freedoms. You and I have it, the Americans have it, the West has it, the Afghans want it, and there is no reason that they should be denied it. There's no reason why they should be less favored in this respect. So I totally agree with you, and I think this kind of distortion of the image that Ambassador Haidery also referred to, caused by Islamic extremism, Islamist extremism, and by the Taliban, needs to be corrected. Perhaps someone should do it. If you happen to be in the media, please do what you can. And I think the second question of Pratik about the EU and the US, I think the basic sort of commonalities we had with the US, with the EU as opposed to the US, was that the EU did not really have the powers, but the US was anxious to leave in a hurry. The EU did put some conditions to recognizing the Taliban, and those conditions were basically what the Afghan people wanted, which was, basic rights for the Afghan people. And they maintained that during that period of the transition and withdrawal, and that's the difference that I think you're referring to. But there's a second element, having said that, the Europeans have been fairly quick in re-engaging with the Taliban and also reopening some kind of low-level mission, short of legitimization, short of recognition. Mainly, I think, because they are concerned about the possible spillover in terms of refugees to Europe. Again, a political interest of their own. So I would say that, each country has been acting according to its own interests. And the Afghan people are, collateral damage in that. But yeah, the basic point of commonality was that for the US, once they decided that they left, they did not care about democracy. They did not care what would happen. In fact, some would argue, I have done, that they in a way facilitated the return of the Taliban and the return of instability in Central Asia, perhaps for other political reasons. Whereas, countries like India, which are in the region, could not possibly afford those kinds of instability, and therefore continued to maintain that we should have a stable withdrawal and a political settlement before the withdrawal. None of that happened because both the decks, both on the battlefield as well as on the negotiating table, were turned against the Islamic Republic and in favor of the Taliban in the course of the Doha process.
Thank you, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay. Chief Marshal Gagan, any final concluding remarks? Gagan? I think he's busy on call. Okay. So I think we've come to the end of the program, and it's been a wonderful session. Gagan, you've come back. Would you like to give a final remarks?
Yes, actually, I would like to say the final word with regard to what is really happening. I think we as people of this world, we need to come in and support the Afghan population at large. That's very important, irrespective of what the regime is. There is a lot of suffering taking place in that country. So with all the constraints, with the freezing of assets, it is not the Taliban that has been mostly affected, that is the general population that has been affected. So I think the international community as well as the UN has a big responsibility, and especially with the snow coming in now with the winters, they are having a hard time. But only good point is there are no power cuts because there are no one to damage the pylons. So now there are no power cuts. That is what I was told. After many years, the winters, they have had total power. So I wish to convey that message at large that we need to help the Afghanistan population somehow in whatever way that we could do and make our presence shown so that the cause is cleared for the future of them. Thank you very much, Marshal Mateshwaran, and two colleagues, ambassadors, Ashraf Hydari and Gautam Mukhopadhyay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador Ashraf Hydari, Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, Air Chief Marshal Gagan Balatsingh. It's been a very enriching discussion. It's been an excellent panel discussion, and thank you so much on behalf of Peninsula Foundation. Let me request Madhavanti to do the closing orders. Madhavanti, yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you for a very stimulating and an invigorating session. The discussion and analysis of future options from a South Asian perspective on Taliban-controlled Afghanistan was a much-needed one. I'm sure we all have many takeaways from today's session. We will make a report of it and upload it on our website for the benefit of students and IR enthusiasts. I would like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of our panelists who participated in our webinar despite their busy schedules and other commitments. It was truly an honor to be in your virtual presence and to bear witness to your valuable words and insights. I also thank Air Marshal Madeshwaran for bringing together all these great minds. And finally, I thank the TPF team who worked behind the scenes to make this webinar possible. I would like to inform the audience that you can follow the Peninsula Foundation on Twitter at TPF Space Chennai for updates on future events. Hope to see you all in another discussion soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you. I'm sorry we missed Bahar Jalali.
I know we missed her, but we'll get her sometime in another event. Okay. She's assured us that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matsi. Thank you, Ambassador Hydari and Gautam.
Bye, Shekhar. Thank you. Yeah, good to